Hello, everyone. I'm Asha Nayaswami, and we're working with the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, and we will probably be working with it for the rest of our lives or something close to that. It has been inspiring people for centuries, so for us to put a few years into it doesn't seem like much, at least not to me. So I've done this whole book once before on an audio recording, which is somewhere buried in the archives of Nanda Palo Alto, if you look for it. I also did 18 classes a few years ago, but now this is the third time through for me, and second time in this part of the book, and I'm really enjoying it. So I hope you all do too. I'm not in a hurry. When I did the classes, the audio classes, I committed in advance to 10 pages at a time. And after I finished, I swore I would never do that again. Because, 10 pages of Swami's book, sometimes you only want to do a paragraph. So we're just going slowly. I do not pretend to be anything like Sri Yukteswar training master, but Master talked about how Sri Yukteswar kept him on one verse for a very, very long time. I believe it was the Gita. It might have been Patanjali, but I believe it was the Gita. And if you really draw the truth from one stanza, then you know it all. And Master describes how he was impatient to move forward, and finally he understood. And after Master had grasped the essence of the scripture, Sri Yukteswar just closed the book and said, now you'll be able to read any scripture and understand it. It's really quite just an extraordinary implication about what real knowledge is and how we really learn. We're so much in the West tied to intellectual understanding. We don't operate from the point where what you develop is intuition, and then you can apply that intuition to anything and it'll reveal itself. I've in the West, of course, in America where I live, there's a lot of devotion to Jesus, and there's a very strong stream, what you would call it, segment of people who are deeply devoted to Jesus and who read the Bible all the time. And sometimes those people read only the Bible. And I, being a person who's learned to read when I was 4 and have always read for relaxation, I could always wonder how you could just read the same book over and over again. We project upon others our own way of thinking. And I don't even remember what the circumstances were, but I was probably in seclusion, because, of course, when one is in seclusion, everything slows down, and one realizes how the environment keeps one so restless. It's a great practice to be able to go into seclusion. And I guess I was reading the Bible at that point. At some point in my life, I discovered the New Jerusalem Bible. And I don't have it downstairs here in my house where I'm speaking from, or I would show it to you. It's a big, huge one like that. And I don't know if it's the most accurate or poetic translation or anything like that, but it reads really easily. And when I had that copy of the Bible, I actually read it from front to back. I bogged down a bit in the Old Testament. I got sort of tired and I skipped. But I read all the way through the New Testament, all the way from the beginning to the end. And somehow in that experience, the reality of the concept of Scripture really communicated itself to me. I mean, Scripture is not an ordinary book. Scripture is symbolic. What would you call it? Let me think what the word would be. It's the bridge. It's the bridge between human awareness and divine awareness. And when you're reading Scripture, you're not reading a book. You're traveling across that bridge. And the stories and the words and the contemplating the meaning and so on like that, I mean, it's all very inspiring. But when you're really reading Scripture, you're crossing that bridge. And I could really see how you could just read nothing but the Bible, or nothing but the Gita, or nothing but Patanjali, or whatever scriptures there are, nothing but the Talmud, or whatever the different books are, if you're actually reading Scripture and not just reading words. And to my experience, sometimes I am and sometimes I'm not. It's I'm not a person of fixed realization. I'm a person of aspiring realization, and so every so often I have really good days. And whenever you have, the thing about it is when you have those good days, they're so crystal clear to you. You just can't imagine why you don't always know this. But I've enough experience now. I mean, that's the advantage of having been on the path longer, that you just get used to it. Whenever I've been in seclusion, the way I can function in seclusion is just quite different than I function in my normal life. And I used to imagine that when I would come out of seclusion, I would be able to continue to function that same way. But I realized that literally the moment you walk out of seclusion, for me, it's sort of like it's a gift. It's really like reading the last chapter of the book. It's like if you read the last chapter of the book and you know it's a happy ending, you're not so scared when you're reading through it. Sometimes I'm not one. I like to know that the movie I'm attending has a happy ending, so I won't be scared. And I know certain authors, nothing too terrible is ever going to happen, or certain movie directors. I don't read that many novels anymore, just occasionally, and I hardly go to movies. But when I know that the person that I really like is not going to turn out to be the evil person, it's very relaxing to me. Or that the people that I love are not going to be killed, it's very relaxing to me. And so knowing the end, and a lot of time on the spiritual path also, right at the very beginning, God gives us really extraordinary experiences. And then that gets us hooked, so to speak. You know where you're going. And then oftentimes you get thrown back to page 1. And you know what the last part of the book is, and that's what keeps you going through it, symbolically speaking, meaning you know what realization is. I had a lot of those experiences with Swamiji. I don't know, being with Swamiji, it was like, well, it wasn't, let me just think about this honestly. I rarely had moods when I was with him. I've had lots of ups and downs in my life. So I must have also expressed them in his company. Certainly I did. Certainly I had to have, because I don't have that much control. But somehow whenever I was close to him, whatever we were doing, he was the geographic center of creation. And so if I was at the geographic center of creation, there was no restlessness to be anywhere else. And so much of any kind of mental lack of equanimity is somehow some part of you is trying to be somewhere else than where you are. And with Swamiji, wherever I was when I was with him, I was I call it geographic because it was physical, because he was physically there. I was at the geographic center of the universe. And that created such a deep sense of relaxation inside of me, because there was no place else I wanted to be except exactly where I was. And that was 100% true through my entire life with him. If there was an opportunity to be with him, or if I was with him, I never wanted to be anywhere else. I couldn't even have ordinary conversations with people when they would distract me too much from listening to him. I couldn't go there. I would have to say to people, I'll be happy to talk to you about that, but not while Swami's in the room. Because sometimes, he would just be reading and people would just be social. It wasn't like people were being rude, but I couldn't move my mind that far away. When he died, 2013, so now, like it's 6 years, that was one of the most compelling realizations. It was like all of a sudden, planet Earth was all the same. It didn't matter. It didn't make any difference to me where I was. There was no point of reference because he wasn't on planet Earth anymore. Just amazing how these things happen. And of course, what that experience is trying to tell you is because the experience was within me. Swami wasn't having the experience. It was I who was having the experience. And I allowed I allowed certain circumstances to define my consciousness, in this case in a very positive way, but I allowed external circumstances to define an internal state of awareness. But what I had then was an internal state of awareness. So the obvious question which I would ask myself is, why do I not have this state all the time? And I have no good answer for that. Swami had a lot of magnetism. That's what it is about the power and presence of a saint. There's an expression in India, one moment in the company of a saint will be your raft over the ocean of delusion. That statement is actually in the section of the Gita that we're dealing with. I haven't forgotten where I am and what we're talking about. Because once you have that experience, it becomes your reference point for everything else, and nothing else measures up to it. And so that becomes, even if it is reduced to a subconscious reality, one has a point of comparison. And that point of comparison makes every other experience not quite measure up. And that's what drives us. And as I say, it's not necessarily even conscious. And this is why in the readings of Edgar Cayce, who was a savant, a psychic, and he would read people's past lives, and many people, all his work, he died decades ago, and all his readings have been codified, and there's a huge archival library of all his readings, and they've been cross-referenced, and so every reading that he ever gave where he mentioned the life of Jesus and somebody being with Jesus, it's all in one place. I've only read snippets of it. It's not my particular study, but this point is what's so interesting. That he said to many, many people that they had an experience with Jesus, and not even a significant experience. I mean, not even a big, very important, I was raised from the dead, he cured me of blindness experience, but just you were standing in the marketplace and he went by. Your hand brushed his hand. He looked you in the eye. And then Cayce said, Cayce himself was deeply devoted to Jesus, so perhaps that's also why those people were drawn to him. Not that he would be biased that way, but those people would be drawn to him because he was acting as an instrument of his master. Cayce was. But then he would say that encounter has been the defining and motivating force of your life ever since, 2,000 years. And many of these people were extremely ordinary people from the point of view of majestic spiritual accomplishment. They were apparently ordinary people. But that pulse of contact with that kind of magnetism just continued to throb and continued to move them. I've often thought of it as if we could plant a radioactive nugget within our hearts. I don't know the science of radioactivity really at all, but this is how it feels to me, is that I know that it can cause mutation. So I think of this in terms of a positive mutation, a drop of pure divine consciousness is planted inside of us, and it just keeps throbbing. And so there's this vague sense of being out of tune, unless we're in tune with that. And it keeps just sounding its note until everything else gradually is forced to come into alignment with it. That's the good news. That's the very, 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 very good news. It's just divine destiny is inescapable. The path is long. There's just no way around it. I recently read a blog. I guess that's the word. Blog is such an ugly word. I wish there was a better word for it. Anyway, a blog, an article that was written by Nayaswami Diksha. She's one of the prominent teachers of our yoga teacher training course at Ananda Village. And she had an experience. You can read it on probably ananda.org. I'm sure you can find it. She called it 25 Days Off the Ground or something like that. She went to India. She was leading a group at this Ayurvedic resort, and she just took a very small step and broke a bone in her foot. But the nature of the break was that she couldn't put any weight on her foot, I guess, for 25 days. She was eventually in a cast, but it was a non-weight-bearing cast. And she was out in some relatively remote area without any Wi-Fi access, which means no movies, no streaming movies, no Kindle books, whatever. I don't know what Diksha's preferred form of light entertainment is, but she mentioned it. And she just talked about, and she talked very openly and wrote rather beautifully about just when one is pressed really hard, one just suddenly realizes that there's still a lot of space between me and God. And, one can rightly claim, and she certainly has the right to claim, tremendous dedication and self-surrender. And, she's a Nayaswami. I don't just mean that she has the title of Nayaswami. She's a Nayaswami. She's a sadhu. But she's not yet self-realized. And it was very interesting when I read that, and I wrote to her, because the last few years, I don't know how many years it's been, I lose track, certainly since Swami died, probably since Swami died. Because see, as long as Swami was on the planet, even though I haven't lived in the same community he's lived in since 1987, first 16 years I lived where he lived and saw him virtually every day. Then more than 30 years ago, I moved from the village to Palo Alto, and he eventually moved to Europe, and then he went to India. And, it's just so it's not been that kind of proximity, but he was still always there. And periodic contact with him, even through email or the telephone, made me happy to be on the planet. Because if I could be on a planet in which I could talk to him, it was a planet worth being on. And even though there were lots of tough times, as long as I could talk to him, this planet was an okay place. But when he left the planet, it's sort of like, well, Master's word, the anguishing monotony of it, but it was more than that. It was the bleakness of it. And God knows, I have wonderful friends, and my life is, I have never for a moment failed to appreciate what an extraordinary blessed life I have. And don't take this as a complaint. I'm not complaining. I'm talking about something quite different. I'm talking about Vairagya. Vairagya is a disinclination for this world. It's a beautiful word, Vairagya. And Vairagya is just a disinclination for this world. And it was masked in many ways while Swami was here. I had put it to him when he called from Europe once during a time. It was probably just before he moved to India, which was the early part of the 2000s. And he had some very ill health during that period of time. And he called once and he said he was so weak. He told me he had been so weak the night before that he said he felt he could have just slipped away. It would have been effortless for him just to stop breathing. And of course, that was not a happy thought for me, but I had to be sincere and fair with him. I said, well, sir, any time that you're ready to go, we'll miss you, but you've done the work of 10 people already in this life, and it would be absolutely selfish of us to want you to stay. I mean, not that he would allow my opinion to actually determine, but it was important for me to say it. But I said, it's not going to be any fun to be on this planet without you. I mean, that was the sincere part of it. He was very silent for a moment, and then, he had 3.5 years with Master, and Master died before he was 26. Swami came when he was 22, and before he was 26, Master was gone. And Swami was going to go to India with Master. I mean, he had his whole life. The Master was not old. He was 59 when he passed. So there was no reason in the world to think Master would leave so soon. So when I said that to Swami, he was very quiet, and I said it seriously but lightly. Very seriously, Swami answered. I know, he said. I've been through it. And I thought, my word, Swami's lived 60 years. Well, he eventually lived 60 years after his guru passed. I know, I've been through it. And Lord knows the little bit that I've experienced, Swami's had it spectacularly, and he was even ostracized by his own Guru Bhais. He made a new family with us, but he never had the company of those who had shared that experience with Master, and he was very lonely for it. He didn't complain, but he was very lonely. But just the degree to which suffering is inherent in this life, this is the Buddha. You know, this all sounds very sad, and to a certain extent it is sad, and it is the cutting edge of spiritual growth. That's why Diksha's article was so interesting to me. I wrote to her, I said, oh my, I guess this is just a stage in the spiritual life, isn't it? You know, those of us who've been doing this for 30 or 40 years, and we're not God realized, and we're far from it. Well, I'll speak for myself. I'm far from it. I mean, God realized look like Swamiji. I know what that looks like, and that's not me. I don't mind. You know, I'm a lot closer than I used to be, so that's all that I need to know. But I guess it's a stage where you really do just, on some level, you have to really want nothing but God. And even just a kind of warm affection, a sentimental affection for the things of this world has to be transcended. But it can't be transcended into sadness. It has to be transcended into bliss. And that's bliss is a dynamic higher state. See, Vairagya itself can sink into depression. And one can think of it as spiritual, but if it's not joyful, it's not spiritual. And so it's a very interesting fine line. And you know, it's what I think about all the time. The very end of Swami's life, literally the last week or two, he wrote a letter which became known as the Easter letter. He died maybe a week after Easter, maybe 2 weeks that year. And he wrote a letter, and it was just filled with Vairagya. He talked about how he's always been so enthusiastic. He has no enthusiasm anymore. He used to have all these interests. Everything just feels like ashes to him. And it freaked people out. And in fact, it was a goodbye letter from him. But I read it as Vairagya, and I could tell. He said at the end of Master's life, Master also became very... Master began to repudiate this world. And Swami hints at it only in the path. He describes how, I believe it was Sister Shraddha, but I'm not certain, but I think it was her. It was one of the nuns who had been with Master for many years, and it served him personally. And she was in the hallway outside Master's room, and she was weeping. And she was saying, I just can't please him anymore. Nothing I do pleases him. And Swamiji commented that, you know, she was a very dear disciple of Master's. It wasn't that that she was being reprimanded at the end of her life, of Master's life. But Swami was saying that at the end of Master's life, he just repudiated everything. He was just getting ready to leave. And he had to, and you think he's a God-realized Master. I mean, wouldn't he have been free all the time? You know, we have these, the only word I can think of is incredibly immature ideas of what spirituality really is. I feel very humble in the face of true spirituality. I'm not without understanding, and I even have, I would say, a modicum of wisdom, and I have some intuition, but the difference between what I am able to articulate and what actual God realization is, I'm fully aware of the difference and not the least bit dismayed or embarrassed by it, except, I suppose, in this conversation, in a sense I am. But Swami was explaining that somehow even a master, he just has to cut his ties with this world because he has to walk away from it. And the master fully embraces it, and he has to walk away from it. Even Lahiri Mahashaya, they tell you in Autobiography of a Yogi, when he received the message from Babaji that his life was about to end, that the end of his incarnation was near, stories in the autobiography of Yogi. I can't remember, maybe it was Sri Yukteswar who brought the message or another disciple. But anyway, Babaji sent a message to Lahiri. And then it talked about how Lahiri immediately became very, very grave. And they might even say his body trembled, but I'm not certain of that. But then he withdrew for many hours into absolute, very somber silence. And in the book it says, even a master, he had to cut his ties with this world. And so we have to cut our ties, but we have to cut our ties upward. And you know, the fun thing about this path, which I really, I wouldn't trade for anything in the world. Of course, it's much too late. When I came to this path, I was only 22 when I met Swamiji, but I feel like I had sort of gone through a lot, and I don't mean that I'd suffered a lot. I'd done a lot of neti, which is the yonic practice. Neti means not this, not this. The yonic practice is you look at everything in the world and you say, this is not the infinite, this is not the infinite, this is not the infinite. And you repudiate it all, neti. It's one year for Halloween at Ananda, we used to have these wonderful Halloween parties, and one year I went as the wisdom tooth. And I had a little sign that said neti. And one of my friends went as the tooth fairy, and another friend went as the sweet tooth, and she was all covered with fillings, but this is all beside the point. But neti, even though I was only 22, I really felt that I'd already spent my life doing it. It's like I couldn't find anything to believe in. I had so much energy, and I had such a desire to commit myself, but I couldn't find anything that I believed in. So I was very desperate, actually, in a kind of quiet, practical way, but I was intensely desperate. So when I found, let me see now, and so I felt like I had already had a lot of disappointments, even though if you looked at my life, it was perfectly privileged. I mean, there was nothing bad had ever happened to me. Nothing bad has ever happened to me in my life, I dare say, really. But I still felt that many things that I had high hopes for had disappointed me. So when I actually found Swamiji and then moved to Ananda and really committed myself to the spiritual path, I had absolutely no reason to doubt, and I had no doubts. I had no doubts at all. From the moment I saw Swamiji to sitting here right now, I've never had any doubts. Just thank you, God. And I know 100% what a blessing that is, and I do not take it for granted. I just knew who he was. I trusted him completely. I failed many times living up to that, but that didn't mean that I ever lost faith in it. But I really didn't know. I mean, other things had just run out faster than they were supposed to. So I didn't know whether this one would. So it's been fabulous that it never has. And even though it's hard, and Divine Mother has made sure that I've had enough hard tests, just before I became a Nayaswami, which was November 2009, so that was 10 years ago. So I'm 72 now, so I was just past my 60th year. 60s, just into my 60s, and I came to the path I came to Ananda when I was 24, to Swami when I was 22, all those years just putting them together. When Swamiji told us about the Nayaswami order and invited us to apply, every one of us had to apply and be accepted by him. No one was automatic. I remember him turning to me and saying, well, do you want to join? And it was, gosh, so self-evident to me that of course I wanted to. But he was I realized, I thought he was teasing me, but he was very serious. You know, you have to make this commitment yourself. And so I had to very seriously say, yes, sir, I would very much like to be initiated. But because I had just passed the age of 60, and since I'm just rambling, I'll just keep rambling. When I was young, in my teens and into my 20s and so on, I was never very good at being a girl. I didn't understand makeup and hair and clothes and things like that. I mean, I just didn't quite get it. I always felt very feminine, and I always think of my future incarnations as being female. I don't know if I'm essentially, a yin incarnation. I really don't know, but I tend to think of myself as female. But the girl type stuff, I never really knew how to do. I didn't know how to do it. And eventually, when I came to live in Palo Alto, especially, which was 1987, by then I was, 35, 40. I guess I would have been 40. I really had to present myself. And, I was a singleton here at that point. We had an Ananda Center, which was well established, but not large. And we just had to start really working with it. So I had to look at everything. And I considered this to be, which it is, a very sophisticated area. And prior to that, I'd been living out in Nevada County. I'd been out in the country for 16 years. And so I needed to present myself in a way that would make the right impression. Swamiji had actually reprimanded me earlier for not presenting myself in a sufficiently dignified manner as a representative of Master. So I had to learn to dress, and I found a wonderful color and fashion consultant, and basically she just gave me my instructions for how to be a girl. So I followed them for the next 20 years. And, I like clothes and fabric, so I got into it. But then I saw that I was aging, and I had begun to think to myself, how does a woman age gracefully? And I really began to study people in my quadrant of life, 60 to 80. And I was just beginning to try to understand how I could continue to present myself as a gracious lady and have magnetism, because I'm a representative of Master. I don't have that kind of vanity. I just don't think of myself that way, but I have a responsibility. So I was in the middle of all of that. I mean, really, literally, scarves, makeup, earrings, just like why are some older women magnetic and others are not? And then Swami came up with the Nayaswami order. And it suddenly raised the prospect of abandoning it all and becoming a sannyasi. And so when he asked me what I thought about this in an earlier conversation, he asked me just in general what I thought about the Nayaswami order. And I remember I said to him, I've been really trying to understand how I can make the last 20 years of my spiritual life as dynamic as the first 40 years. Would it have been 40? Yeah, almost 30 years have been. And I said, I'm concerned because age affects us. I don't want to lose ground. I want to keep accelerating. I said, so I've been trying to understand how to make these last 20 years as dynamic as the years that have come before. And I said, I feel that this vow of sannyas will rescue me from spiritual mediocrity. And sometimes I say something to Swami and I don't realize how serious it is. And he just looked at me and just very, very somberly said, yes, it will. Wow. And on one level it was, oh, the divine promise. Thank you so much. But it has. And I mean, the fact that I no longer wear makeup or earrings and have cut my hair very short and all my clothes are blue, it means something. But it's more like what this means inside of me. Being a sannyasi is a very real thing. That's why when I refer to Diksha, I say she's a Nayaswami. I don't mean she's been initiated as a Nayaswami. I mean she is a Nayaswami. And fortunately I know many others who, this vow of sannyas is not small. It really says, from now on I embrace as the only purpose of my life the search for God. I no longer exist as a separate entity, but offer myself unreservedly into thy great ocean of awareness. I mean, really, there it is. I accept nothing as mine, no one is mine, no talent, no success, no achievement as my own, but everything is thine alone. I might as well finish the whole thing. I will feel that not only the fruit of my labor, but the labor itself is thine. Act through me always, Lord, to accomplish thy design. I am free in thy joy, and will rejoice forever in thy blissful presence. Help me, Lord, to achieve perfection in this my holy vow. For I have no goal in life but to realize thee and to be an instrument of thy blessing to all mankind. As you can see, I know that vow. And it's very short. Every time I finish reciting it, often when I finish reciting it, I look back at the piece of paper where it's written and I say, have I forgotten anything? Oh, there is a line in there, I will never take a partner, because I am complete in myself, and within myself will merge all the opposites of duality. I forgot about that line. And then there's also a phrase, or if I am married, but since I am not, I don't recite that part. But there you have it. You know, I no longer exist as a separate entity. And then you break your foot, or something else happens, some cherished attachment is snatched away from you, me. And then all of a sudden, where is it? I certainly exist as a separate entity, and I certainly accept as mine the things that have been taken away from me. And where are they? Ah, this is why we take vows. You know, sometimes people hesitate to take vows because they have lots of reasons. But you don't take a vow for something that you've already accomplished. You know, I don't say, I will never murder, I won't steal, you know, I won't plunder other people's property, I won't go to war for greed. I don't have to take a vow to do that. I would never do that. But I do have to take a vow that says, I no longer exist as a separate entity, but offer myself unreservedly into thy great ocean of awareness. And then you say, yes, between aspiration and realization there is a gap. But that's all right, as I was saying earlier, because you see, therefore this never becomes tiresome. And then we get to the other side of it. You know, we get to the other side of wherever we're going. I had a funny conversation with Swamiji once. This is just amusing reminiscences. You know, the book that I've written about Swamiji, Swami Kriyananda Light Bearer, we had the book launch a couple of days ago, May 19th, 2019. That's the official publication date. I got free copies. I wish I had one in front of me. I'll have to wait till the next one to hold it up for you. And so I think because of launching that book, I'm in a mood of reminiscence, which haven't even read. Chapter 3, verse 3, stanza 4 of the Gita, and I may not. We'll see what happens. But I'm in a mood of reminiscing, because that book for me was that was my Lifetime Achievement Award, was to get that book published. And you can order it now, actually. If you're watching this live or you read this later, it's on Amazon. Swami Kriyananda Light Bearer. You can go get it. The physical book will be ready and will be in America by the end of May. But the e-book and the audiobook are online right now. So coming back to it, I was telling about, you know, Swamiji, this was years before he died, but he got into an intense mood of Vairagya. Now this is important because his attainment of bliss was not effortless. And what I was also talking about Master, you know, sort of pushing away. It's like, again, we have these very immature ideas of what this is about. It's like this world still touches us. When the heart becomes that tender, this world still touches us. I remember, this is a different one, but when I was sitting with Swamiji, we were actually in a restaurant as it happened. I have a visual memory. So often when I think about a particular story, I also think about where we were when it happened. We were sitting in a restaurant, and we were talking about some horrible aspect of life on this planet. We might have been talking about movies. I remember Devarshi, Nayaswami Devarshi, talking about some kind of a movie, the title of which was, you know, The Chainsaw Massacre or something like that. It had some horrific title about horrific violence. And I remember him saying, imagine living on a planet where people, imagine there being a planet where people make movies like that. And then he said, and we're living on it. It's like, what, get me out of here, Lord. But we were having a conversation like that about just some level of moral depravity, which was just popular culture. And I jokingly said to Swamiji, sir, because I've often said, Master came and Swami came, and then we had to come with Swami. I said, sir, please, the next time you reincarnate, please wait for a Satya Yuga, wait for a higher age. I don't think I can do this again. Of course, I was joking, but only half. And he just emphatically said, I hope never to come back. Just like that. I hope never to come back. And then he said, even in the highest age, he said, it's still the material plane. It isn't freedom. He said, it's nicer, and I love this, because people like us are in charge. That's how he put it. I said, so the whole world operates like Ananda? He said, yes. I said, well, that will certainly be more pleasant, won't it? But it's still, he said, the material plane. It's not God realization. Now, of course, many times later, Swami said, I know, I've said I would never come back. He said, but I know myself, is how he put it. He said, I know myself, meaning I know that my heart is filled with compassion. And just like Master said, I will return again and again if necessary. Even in his intense Vairagya letter on Easter, he said, I don't care about anything in this world. He said, I care about you, except for you, and meaning everyone to whom he was writing. He said, but I don't care about your smallnesses, meaning all of our petty egoic concerns. I care about your soul. I want God realization for you. Well, anyway, coming back to this other experience, this was more humorous, but it wasn't humorous, really. Swamiji was just in this mood of intense Vairagya. We were actually in Assisi. And I think most people, I think it was the time when the entire staff of the Ananda Assisi community went to India. And David and I went to Italy to fill in for all the people who were gone. Cook, secretary, companion, driver, we did everything. And so there weren't many people around. And Swami waited till he was completely alone, until only I was present. And then he really just talked about how difficult it was to be in this world, just because of the suffering. Just the deep level of suffering that goes on, and just how very hard it was. And how many, he said to me, many great saints, become quite sad, disillusioned, distressed. I don't quite know what the word exactly he used. But he was trying to convey the same feeling he was talking about. And I just listened to him. I knew that he just wanted to talk. But so he talked about it. The reason I'm bringing it up is because I've been trying to understand my own feelings. And of course, if I can see that I'm walking in Swami's footsteps, I feel much more secure. And he was presenting to me something that I at the time didn't know, because his presence always precluded my feeling it. But since he's left, I understand how he feels. And then it was I don't know whether it was a mood, which you would call an emotional state, or whether it was a bhav. And a bhav is a spiritual attitude. It felt more to me like a bhav. For this reason, because even though what he was describing was mournful, the effect it had on me was uplifting. So it's sort of like, will that day oh come to me, Ma? Or in this world, Mother, no one can love me. In this world, they do not know how to love me. That's actually the words, they do not love thee. But in this world, they do not know how to love thee. Where is their true loving love? There my soul longs to be. It's one of Master's chants, and it's always been one of my favorites, because that poignancy is there. That longing for God is a little bit of the bliss of God in a strange way. I've had people who don't know our path well sometimes ask why so many of our chants are sad. Door of my heart, wilt thou come, wilt thou come? And They had never even heard, in this world, Mother, no one can love thee. But there is that longing, but that breaking open of the heart is the turning away from the world. And even that breaking open of the heart is the realization that I do belong somewhere. And I think that's where the bliss comes from. It's not even and only that you feel happy, it's that you know that you belong somewhere. Someone commented, an American who, like many of us, at Ananda has never really fit into this world until we found Ananda. He went with us on our pilgrimage to India. One of our pilgrimages to India, for 20 years, every year or so, we'd take a group to India. I became extremely knowledgeable about a very narrow part of India, just this trip that we would take to Master's shrines. But once he arrived in India, and many of us who were born in the West are really more in tune with the East, and he said he didn't need to live in India, but just knowing that there was a place and a culture to which he actually belonged, he said, eased his heart enough to be able to live in the West. And that's sort of, I think those deep yearning chants are the heart realizing that my heart does have a home. And even if I'm not in my home, the fact that I have a home changes everything. So I'm explaining to myself something of Swami's bhav, and to a certain extent my own bhav. It also makes it more poignant, because if you think you're home, you feel fine. If you haven't noticed yet that you're not. These are all very complicated. Now I'm trying to tell you a humorous story because I'm being so somber here. But anyway, so this bhav of Swami's went on for a while, and I remember finally we were in his little house in Assisi, and it's smaller than the Crystal Hermitage, and it was smaller than the houses he had in India. He called it Seva Kutir, house of service. And so we were sitting in the living room, the kitchen's just off the living room, and he was still in this bhav, and he was talking to me about this and that. And this was really what was going on, because the more he talked about it, and by then I think his mood was shifting, because now he was sort of talking in such a way that he was almost deliberately exaggerating. One of his superconscious living techniques is, if you have an inclination that is pulling your consciousness down and makes you feel insecure or something, he said, keep exaggerating it in a negative until you reach the bottom, and then you rebel and you say, I'm not that bad. Like I'm worthless, nobody loves me, nobody's ever loved me. Even the people who act like my friends, they're not really my friends. Even this person who says they're my friend, they're not really my friend. Until some part of you says, no, actually, she really does love me. I have one friend. And then you can sort of build back up from that. So Swami, by this point, was beginning, with just a little touch, to be making fun of himself as he was expostulating about this planet and life, and just having to incarnate, be in a physical body and everything. And so I was beginning to feel more and more amused. And then finally I said, sir, I said, I really don't know what to offer you, sir, as a solution, except perhaps euthanasia. And he looked at me, just, for just a moment, just like shocked. And then he began to laugh, and I laughed with him, and we just, the whole mood just shifted, and we were just laughing so hard. And then he said, finally, he said, well, I know what you can do for me. You can make me a very good Indian lunch, because I was a cook, also his cook, and I needed to go in the kitchen. And I sort of was standing up and kind of not quite, I was hesitating. And finally I said to him, I feel hesitant to leave you. He said, you're afraid I'll throw myself out the window. And I said, yes, sir, I am. Well, he said, I promise not to throw myself out the window. He said, go make me a good lunch. And so that was sort of how the whole thing ended, which it did. And it wasn't even, then I did, and then I made him a very good lunch, actually. But it wasn't even, let me just try to find the right words. it wasn't that anything that he felt changed. You know, like everything he said about this world and everything about his tender-heartedness, it was all still there. So he didn't overcome it by suppressing it, and he didn't overcome it by sugarcoating it. No, no, actually, it's really a beautiful world. There's so much good in it. You know, this is what people do. They try to make it not true. I remember a woman was betrayed in her life, and she was seriously betrayed. And she was very, very hurt by the betrayal. And she was just exerting every ounce of her spiritual muscle to overcome that betrayal and not be upset anymore. So finally she came to Swamiji one day and she said, well, it's all fine because the other person, what they did was just right. Everything that God does, everything that happens is just the way it's supposed to be. It was fine what happened. Swami said, no, it wasn't. He said, that person behaved very badly. And then he said, don't try to make yourself feel better by telling yourself an untruth. That was a very serious advice, isn't it? And see, that's sometimes what we do. We suppress it, we sugarcoat it, because we just don't have the courage to look it right in the face and say, I trusted, I was betrayed. And now what am I going to do? And so what I felt with Swamiji, you know, I broke it with a joke, but the mere fact that the joke arose in me was because the more he was talking, the funnier it was getting to me. You know, earlier it wasn't funny, but the more he talked, the more I just was having to suppress a smile because he knew it too by that point. But it didn't go away. What he did was he expanded his awareness from that. And see, that's what transcendence is. Because this is a mixed bag of a planet at all times, all planets. And the material plane is not, I mean, the material plane is not freedom. It's dense. You have a body. You're bound by all this. Maybe you can travel out of it. Maybe you can transcend it. But the material plane is what it is. And the more you feel yourself to be united with all these people, the more agonizing it is when things happen. I'm not a mother myself, but I can hardly imagine. I had an experience recently where someone who's sort of more like a child to me than other people are, that I have more of a maternal relationship. They had a great disappointment in their lives, and I was just beside myself with sadness. I thought, oh my God, what would it be like to be a mother? I just could hardly imagine it. You know, and I mean, it's the nature of this world. You give your heart, and you're vulnerable. And you can't not be vulnerable. That's not the solution. But you just have to have a faith in God that is bigger than your vulnerability, so that when the inevitable goes through you, it doesn't become you. That you are more. And this is how, Swami talks about it, a self-realized master. It's actually a sentence in this book, but I'm not even pretending to be reading from the book today. A self-realized master never loses his inner sense of freedom. So his inner sense of freedom is always there around this vulnerability. You know, Lahiri Mahashaya begins to weep because people off the coast of Japan are drowning. I mean, and then they find out that a ferry boat sank in Japan, and people were terrified as they were falling into the water. And Lahiri Mahashaya is in Varanasi, India, and he feels in his heart the suffering of these people. I mean, think about what's going on in this planet, and it's just, you don't even know, I don't even know where to go with that. So it's also a little bit of that question that Swami asked Master. He said, Master, if God realization means the complete rejection or disinclination toward anything in this world, would suicides be liberated? You know, it's a logical extension. Why not just kill yourself? And people have weirdly done weird things like that. They get so confused. But Master said, he said, it's not enough to repudiate this world. You must also embrace the infinite. And so that's the point. But in order to embrace the infinite, you have to develop a disinclination for this world. We were talking in some context or another about the need for an enormous amount of money. And people were thinking that because we live in Palo Alto, where there is an enormous amount of money, that means that Ananda Palo Alto has access to an enormous amount of money. No, we don't. We have a wonderfully generous and dynamic congregation, and this area, it's sort of in the water. There's a sense of creative possibilities. But people who are very, very wealthy don't come to the path of self-realization as a rule. And it's not just wealth, but if the world is working for you, you're not inclined to repudiate it. And it's not that you're not capable of succeeding in the world. It's that one has a disinclination for that kind of life. That was my reality growing up. It wasn't that I couldn't have succeeded at any number of options. I just couldn't think about why I would want to. I just had this picture in my mind of myself at the end of my life having been a doctor, a professor, a politician, an actress, any of those things. And I could just see myself at the end of my life having nothing or not having anything of what somehow intuitively I knew I really wanted. And I just didn't know what to think about it. And of course, the reason for that, Master says, is very simple. Well, it's that wonderful slang phrase, one of the few ones that Swami really liked. Been there, done that. I've drunk that cup to the bottom. Swamiji said, we learn from being disappointed. We learn from having our desires thwarted. But we learn more from having our desires fulfilled. Because as long as we haven't yet achieved it, we can still imagine a kind of fulfillment from it, and therefore still want to have that experience. But once you have the experience, it's not like it's terrible. To be wealthy, to be successful, to be loved, to have a beautiful home, to have a nice family, to have a nice marriage. All those things. They are what they are. They're not bad. They're just what they are. And you drink the cup to the bottom, and it's not God realization. Even Satya Yuga, still the material plane. And then, even this didn't do it. And then we say, will that day, come to me, Ma, when saying, Mother dear, my eyes will fill with tears. Door of my heart open wide I keep for thee. Wilt thou come? Wilt thou come? Wilt thou come? God bless you.